Hello, everyone. My name is Armando Perez-Carreno, and welcome to the Web Talk Show. Today with us is Sean Olson from Olson Injury Lawyers. Hello, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I am very curious how you went from Emmy-winning photojournalist to injury law. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a bit of an unusual career shift, I think. I did photojournalism and television work for about 10 years after I graduated college and loved it. I enjoyed it. I got to travel the world, meet people, tell stories. And but it was never a thing I did for the money because there's just not a whole lot of money in it. And so I always promised myself that when it stopped being fun, I would find something else to do. And it just got to that point. And it was early 2000s, shortly after 9/11. The projects I was working on all got canceled. I was trying to figure out how the heck I was going to pay rent and that kind of thing. And I thought, you know what, maybe this is finally the time to start looking at something else and find something else to do. And so I spent a little bit of time sort of wandering the desert and trying to figure out, what that next step was going to be. And oddly enough, law sort of anchored itself in my brain, and I went after it. It was one of those. I looked at it as it gave me the ability to still tell stories, but at the same time start advocating for people, and hopefully make a difference in lives along the way. And yeah, I jumped both feet in and never looked back, and it's worked out great.
That's amazing. I never saw it that way. You actually do tell stories, right? If you're in
We do. Oh,
litigation,
absolutely.
it's a whole art of storytelling.
That is all we do, yeah, and especially, then in its purest form, it's when we go to trial. We have to tell our clients' stories to a jury of 6 or 9 or 12 people or whatever the case may be, and that's the best part, getting to do that and tell stories that actually make a difference in people's lives. It's a unique opportunity that, not everyone gets to do in their working lives, I think.
No, it definitely isn't. Especially trying to get people to understand a point of view that they might have prejudices against, and in many cases, they might have already made their mind before even going into
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
That's gotta be tough. How do you get into the mindset of I'm going to explain everything to them in a way that they understand where I'm coming from, not trying to convince them, but rather to make them see the other side. How do you do that with so many people at once?
I think the the thing that we do that makes us most effective, the really good trial lawyers that do this, is we just talk like people. We don't. It's so often lawyers want to talk like lawyers, and use Latin and big phrases and words, and we lose sight of what we're doing. We lose that line of communication between people. And, if we just talk like human beings and, talk the way we talk to our family or our friends, that I think is the single best way to tell stories to move people because they understand it. I'm not taking a position of superiority or knowing more than they do. I'm just letting them know what happened. And generally speaking, I think people want to do the right thing, and when they learn what has happened, what's brought this person to be in a position to have their story told, to hire someone like me, I think people get it and they understand what happened. They understand why it happened. And for the most part, they want to do something to fix it.
Wow. What I mean, there's people that listen to this, fortunately, from other parts of the world, not the United States necessarily, that might not understand the judicial system here and how everything
Yeah.
works. So, could you briefly explain what is a jury and what is its position in a case here in the United States?
Yeah. So the United States is unique in that respect. We're one of the very few countries that allows civil cases, so non criminal cases, to be heard and decided by juries. And, it depends state by state, it'll differ, exactly what that looks like. But everybody has trial by jury available to them. I mean, it's even in our Constitution, the Seventh Amendment. And what that means for us is, we've got a judge in the courtroom who will rule on legal issues and make decisions, as to what evidence is admissible and, what kinds of things can be said and what kinds of things can't be. But ultimately, it's a jury. It's a group of people, theoretically a jury of our peers, taken from the community, whatever that community might look like, and they get to decide how the case is ultimately resolved. They can, whether that's for the plaintiff or defendant, the amount of money that's exchanged, if there is any. It's a unique system. I think it's, I think it's a really good system. It takes important decision making out of the hands of politicians and bureaucrats, and it puts it back in the community. And, what better system could you possibly have than to have community members making decisions for other community members? It's a great system.
I agree. The last episode, we had Claudio Terris, who is not an attorney by any measure. He's a musician. He's a very talented artist. And he wrote a book on a study of the legal systems between Mexico, United States, Canada, Argentina, etc., and how part of this could have affected why some of these nations are more prosperous than others, because of the fact that he was telling us, since it's a jury of your peers, and the rule of common law and etc., from the background of it comes from, it's your peers that are judging you and not an external higher force that sometimes people pay more attention or follow more directions compared to maybe in Mexico or Argentina, both fabulous countries, but that you just go on the street and you notice that people will not follow the instructions of the road, right? Because of that, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
I'd never thought about that before, whether that affects our prosperousness. I think it probably does. It certainly makes us safer as human beings, living in America, because, if you let the political system work, and, I think it's probably a universal point of truth at this point in time, that politicians can be purchased, politicians can be bought, and they won't necessarily make decisions that are best for, Joe Smith, your neighbor down the street. They're going to make decisions that are best for the corporation that is, paying for their next reelection campaign and that kind of thing. And, oftentimes, as we've seen throughout history, corporations don't necessarily make decisions that are the safest decisions, that are best for their consumers. They make decisions based on profit and how much profit they're going to make. You've seen it with Ford Motor Company, you've seen it with pharmaceutical companies. There's a myriad stories about how corporations have placed profits over people. But our system ultimately, allows those same people to make decisions and tell corporations or doctors or other lawyers, what safe means and what our community is going to stand for and what it's not. And it takes that decision making out of the hands of the people who are making the money and puts it into the hands of the people who are affected. And I think, if you live in a safe place, if you can walk out your door in the morning and not have to worry about some defective machine taking your life, or, any other number of things, that would cause you harm along the way, and instead focus your efforts on doing whatever that thing is that you've set out to do that day, whether that's to be the best lawyer in town, or the best dry cleaner in town, the best programmer in town. You can focus your efforts on that rather than focusing your efforts on staying alive or staying unhurt. And I mean, it makes sense. I think he's probably onto something. It probably does make for a more prosperous society.
I found it very interesting, and we'll see. The book came out recently, and I believe an attorney who read it is actually helping in the outreach of the actual book, because of all the effects that he
I'm going to
sees
pick
as.
that up.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'll send you a link afterwards, and
All
it's
right.
it's in the show notes in the other one as well. So you made a comment at the beginning about the jury in civil cases versus criminal cases. So what's the difference between a criminal case and a civil case in terms of the courts?
It depends on what state you're in.
Okay.
In a criminal case, you generally have to have a unanimous jury at all times, and you're, constitutionally guaranteed a jury of 12. In a civil case, depending on what state you might be in, you might get a jury of 6, you might get a jury of 12. And so the number of jurors that are going to hear the case is going to be different. And the burden of proof is different. In a criminal case, it's much higher. A prosecutor in a criminal case has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, which in theory is a really high bar, that they have to hit. In a civil case, it's essentially more likely than not. Preponderance of the evidence is what we call it. And it's in theory, a much lower standard. I don't know, practically speaking, whether juries actually, enforce a difference between the two. The judge certainly gives them that instruction, and they're told to think that. I don't know if they actually do or not, but in theory, that's the big difference between the two kinds of cases, is just that burden of proof. What level of proof you have to show to prove your case.
Oh, okay. So I have a follow-up question on that. If
Yeah.
you know how we can get like a court summons or a jury summons, someone can get that, and then
Yes,
you
sir.
appear, and you might get chosen to be a juror or not. And so when that happens, there's both possibilities. So you might be going into a civil case or a criminal case.
I think in most states and most courts, that's the case. Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, on a Monday morning, right, they pool together, 100 people or 200 people. And what will happen then is these judges that are in the courthouse, depending on how many there are, will call up to the clerk's office and say, hey, we got a trial starting. It's going to go. I need 16 jurors, or I need 20 jurors to come down. And so, yeah, at that point in time, it's kind of luck of the draw, whether it's a criminal case you're getting sent to or a civil case. It could be either one.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think many people don't know because they haven't had the opportunity, or maybe they were called but then sent back, and
Yeah.
most don't know what to expect when that happens, right? Because it's
Yeah, and it's ultimately a rare circumstance, that we actually get called and have to serve on a jury, because first you're getting called in, if you get called in at all, from a community of 1 million people, maybe they need 200, and then you come in, and of that 200, they only need 40. And so, the odds of you getting chosen keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And, and ultimately, if you sit on a panel, it's still possible the judge might send you home, one of the lawyers might send you home. Uh, it's a very small percentage of people that actually end up serving on a jury. And a lot of people try to avoid that, but but from everyone I've ever talked to that's actually done it, I've never heard a negative experience. Everyone enjoys it.
interesting. Do people do it more than once? So is there a certain pattern where even if it's that low of a likelihood, some people actually serve multiple times in
It
juries?
can happen, yeah. And if you're in a smaller community, the odds of that happening are greater than if you live in a giant, a city, like Denver or Chicago or something like that. So it can happen. Most of the time, I think most places have a rule in place that if you get called once, you can't get called for another year. Um, but again, with the smaller communities, sometimes they don't have that luxury.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is personal injury law exactly? Because we see it all over the billboards, we see it in commercials, we see it, etc. And for some of us, that's sort of the only thing we see, the truck when the right.
Yeah.
So what is it really? And is it only specific to car crashes, or is it just that's the most common and easy to
Yeah,
market?
certainly. Car crashes. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Car crashes are the easiest cases. They're, the easiest ones to make money on. Everybody's got insurance, right? So you're not taking money out of someone's pocket. You're taking it out of an insurance company's pocket. And there's so many dang car accidents all over the place that, those kinds of cases are plentiful. But what we do, I mean, really encompasses a lot more than just that. I mean, we'll take on, car accidents occasionally and that kind of thing. From there, there's truck crashes as well. You see billboards for that kind of thing. But there's medical malpractice sort of falls under that umbrella. Not a whole lot of lawyers do that kind of work. We do, because it's interesting, and again, it goes back to the core of what we do, which is protecting people, making things safer.
Hmm.
There's slip and falls. Really, just I mean, we've seen everything. It's amazing how many different ways there are in this world to be hurt as a result of someone else's negligence. And that's obviously a core, maybe not obviously, but a core part of any personal injury case is that the harm that's done to you has to be done by someone else when they're being negligent,
Hmm.
right? It's not you, hurting yourself along the way, um, you know, getting hurt as a result of something you did. That's not something I can make a case out of. But if it's someone else who has done that to you, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing we look at. That's the kind of work we do, and that's what personal injury work is.
Interesting. You mentioned medical malpractice. So I think that one's an interesting one because I think this is completely my opinion, but I think in some cases people might be scared to come forward because of the system, right? You go to a hospital, something happens, you're like, you're still we're hit with all the bills. You still have to figure out how to pay all that, and then plus there's something that went wrong, and you don't know who to tell. Are you gonna be able to do anything? Are they gonna bury you in? Like, I think a lot of people are afraid to come forward in those scenarios. So, what do you think people should do to get better informed as to whether they might have a case or not without necessarily having to incur a ton of legal fees or be in danger?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the last part of your question first. In terms of not racking up a ton of legal bills. Generally speaking, the lawyers that do this kind of work will work on what's called a contingency fee basis. And that means we're not asking you for a retainer. We're not sending you a bill for our time. We're choosing to work on cases that we think we can be successful with. And so what that means is we're not going to charge you along the way, but at the end of the day, when we are able to get some sort of a resolution for your case, then that contingency fee comes out of that pile of money that we're able to get for you. And it's usually a percentage, somewhere between 33 and 40%, something like that. Um, but and I get that people are intimidated by the system. They're scared, especially if they've been hurt. And a lot of our clients are catastrophically injured. Their lives are changed forever. And they look at what might be in front of them, if they actually want to sue somebody, particularly a doctor or a hospital, and it's overwhelming. It's a big deal, because people first don't want to sue their doctors. They don't want to sue their hospital. Doctors are heroes, nurses are heroes. And it's hard to imagine putting those folks into a position where, we might be holding them accountable for something they did wrong for whatever reason. Um, so, for those people who are intimidated, who are scared of the system, or beaten down, my best advice is go talk to a lawyer, do a little bit of research, find somebody, that you think is compatible and go talk to them, have a half-hour long conversation. I think most people who do this kind of work are going to be happy to have that conversation. Um, so if you do that, it's going to take some of that mystique out of it and, make your decision making from there, hopefully a little bit more informed, hopefully better.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it comes down to, especially when you got hurt, just like you said, you've just had that happen, and you're like, I don't. And I just said I've never had anything like that happen, fortunately.
And knock on wood.
But yeah, here, tables wood. But but I did have. I mean, I've had some experiences where it might have gone sour really badly, and you notice, right? And so that's when you tell. There's a few experiences that I've had, or either for myself or with someone else, where you're in the hospital and suddenly the doctor walks by. In this case, I was with someone visiting. The doctor comes in. They're like, "Okay, ready for the operation?" Like he had his thing on hand and everything, and it was the wrong room. Like they were
Oh,
about to take them to do something
yeah,
else, right? And that's why they have all those extra checks and like, is it the right leg? Is it the whatever, right?
right.
Because it happens. There was one time that the I broke my my hand, and I was put under, right, and in the ER, but I was still sort of there. And I was hearing all the conversation. It's fine, but I was sort of there, and I heard, and I thought I was dreaming, but the screw, there's a little tiny titanium screw that they put in, and so I heard the doctor getting mad at the whoever went to get it. These are really expensive little things, right?
Yeah,
Like
right.
$4,000 screw or whatever. And but that's not the big thing. He had made the hole perfectly, the incision or whatever. It's a microsurgery, I don't know, whatever they're called. And he put it in, and then it didn't screw. Like it wasn't a match. And I remember like him calling him out and being like, "What? I made the perfect hole. And I have to take it again and make a whole like
And you
mess."
heard all of that.
I heard it. I thought I was dreaming, but then when I went to my visit like a month later or whatever with the doctor, I was like, "Hey, by the way," he was like, "Whoa, you heard it?" No, yeah, it happened. They
Huh,
actually didn't check the screw, and so that's very minor. But you can, I mean, what can happen if someone's distracted in that flow?
right,
And so,
right.
yeah, I do see how your line of work would be very helpful for people who might be in a situation where something happened that might not be on purpose by the staff, but still would be considered malpractice, right?
Right. And it's rare, that you ever find a doctor or nurse or any medical professional who's intentionally trying to harm somebody. I mean, it happens,
Hmm.
but it's a rare circumstance. More often than not, it's, the same, they make mistakes for the same reason that other corporations or other businesses make mistakes. And we see it more often now with the corporatization of medicine, where it's corporations running the system rather than doctors and nurses running the system. And, they're in it for the profits as well. And so, you make more money when you go faster, when you do more in a day. And when you start asking doctors and nurses to do those kinds of things, mistakes are going to get made and people are going to get harmed as a result. It's just a natural consequence of doing that.
You touch on an excellent point that spreads not only to the medicine and health industry, but also now into a lot of other industries. Recently, there was a big case with a company that I won't name specifically, but they started that process of corporatization and moving everything to the call centers and cutting costs and things like that. And people started having accidents. And the problem was that within everything that you're filling out in your disclaimers when you're going to these places, it sort of says that you have to go to an arbitration. What's that? Whatever that's called.
And
You'll be
you got the word right. That's
and
arbitration rather than a jury trial.
exactly. And so I think a lot of people get pulled into that. And then if something happens, they're like, "Oh, okay, so this is what we give you." And it's not. Can you explain a little bit how arbitration works versus other things? Because I think I didn't know. I was shocked when I
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah. So arbitrations they're really a private court system. A lot of arbitrators are former judges, they're former lawyers. And when you sign an arbitration clause in an agreement, you are agreeing that if something bad happens, something that's lawsuit worthy, you're going to take it to that private court rather than to the district court down the street where you'd get a jury trial. Um, and in theory, it sounds like a great idea, because it reduces time to get a decision. It's in theory cheaper to do than, running a whole case through a jury trial. But the problem with that is, and we see this a lot with nursing homes. Nursing homes love arbitration clauses. What happens is, you've got a nursing home, with 1,000 patients or whatever it might be, and they might ultimately have, 100 arbitrations that they're going to have to resolve. Well, the arbitrators know that the nursing home is going to have 100 cases, but your grandmother or your great aunt or great uncle, who's there is only going to have one case. And that makes the nursing home a much more valuable client. And while no one's ever going to admit to this, what you see is the decision making shift away from the harmed individual and over to the corporation or nursing home or hospital or whatever it is that is going to have 100 cases there, because they're going to keep coming back and spending more and more money. Your grandmother or your aunt or whatever isn't. And so it makes financial sense for those arbitrators to favor the corporation that's coming back next week rather than the person that they're never, ever going to see again. And it's the sad reality of it. And, and it doesn't matter whether it's a nursing home or a product that you purchase that you agreed to in the fine print. It happens. And it's not always justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sad. Is there something people can do about it, or is it just, well, you sign or you don't go in and that's it? You're really not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I don't know if there's a great answer to it, because oftentimes, well, a number of things. I mean, when you're entering into an agreement with a corporation or a nursing home or anything, you don't have a whole lot of bargaining power as a single consumer. You just don't. And, oftentimes you're given a contract and that contract is what it is. And sometimes it's 50 pages long and they know you're not going to read it. You know you're not going to read it, and you sign it. And buried deep inside there is that arbitration clause. The only way you can avoid that then is to not sign the agreement. And that's not always a realistic possibility. And realistically, when you're signing that agreement, you don't expect to ever have to exercise that arbitration clause. You're not entering into an agreement thinking you are going to get hurt. That's something that happens to everybody else. It doesn't happen to me. And, for the reality is you can't get away from it. And quite frankly, people don't care at the time of signing because they don't think that's ever going to be an issue.
Yes. I see that. I see that. And yeah, well, I mean, fortunately, this other case became very big and well known, and so I think there was something that could be done for all those people, because there were many people affected, and that couldn't come out, and then could. I don't know how that worked, but I mean that gives us at least hope that maybe some of those practices might be adjusted, because yeah.
Yeah, and I think when those kinds of things are brought to light, when people understand what it really means, that's when change gets made. And we don't have to rely on those, or you change hearts at the corporate level, and they say, okay, fine, do a jury trial if you want, take us to court if you want. We're not going to hold you to it.
And you mentioned something very interesting too, which is the length of the contract. So
Yeah,
outside in whatever space, you have a contract that's long. Regular people like myself, I don't understand much of the legal jargon. I'm like,
right.
what's this? So what's your thought on not using it to create or draft, but using LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, those types of things as a consumer to perhaps get a better understanding of a big document that they sent you?
Yeah, I think LLMs and whether it's Claude or ChatGPT, it's an amazing tool for those kinds of things. If you're able to take that agreement and upload it and just have a conversation with those things, and say, what does this mean? Break this down into layman's terms for me. Give me 10 bullet points as to what I'm agreeing to. It's huge. It's taking so much power. Assuming people are willing to exercise it, they're taking so much power away from the lawyers and the corporations that have created that document. And bringing it back to themselves. And truly getting an understanding of what it is that they're agreeing to, hopefully. But yeah, I think that those tools are amazing for that kind of thing. And we're just, obviously, as just in the infancy of that technology. Uh, I think it's going to restore a great deal of power back in the consumer and citizens.
I agree. I think many people can take your advice here and not only ask it to tell it to you in layman's terms, but talk to the document, like you're saying, like actually just put it up there and then ask it questions. Like, what does this mean? What is this compared to this other thing? I found myself one day, a potential client of ours sent their agreement, a non-disclosure type of agreement. And sometimes we do those for specific industries and things that are more specific. Yeah, let's say that.
Sure.
We typically have a type of agreement that's for both sides, right? And this one, I don't know, it felt odd just by reading it. It felt a little one-sided. So I put it into one of these just out of, and not only did it explain it, but then it went further to actually say, this looks a little bit one-sided. Like it looks like they're using this to be able to enforce this, and this other thing, which is not typical in an agreement of this type. And I found that to be very helpful because, I mean, how would one know, especially if one doesn't understand the legal jargon associated with it?
Yeah, because historically it's been lawyers who write those agreements up, and they're certainly not writing it for our benefit. They're writing it for the benefit of their client. And, and they make it opaque. They make it long. It's all, it's intentionally done so that you don't understand what it is that you're doing. It's like, the Apple user agreement, every time you get a software update, no one's going to read that whole dang thing. And they know it, but it's there to protect them. It's not there to protect you.
So it is true then. That people, they're intentionally complex. It's not that you have to make a legal document confusing.
Yeah, I think that is exactly correct. No one's ever going to admit to that, but yeah, I think there is a lot of intentionality in it. And quite frankly, I mean, you get more than one lawyer involved in something, and they're going to make it longer. They're going to make it more complex, because we're trained to look into the future and think, oh my gosh, how many different things could go wrong? And then, we come up with this list of 50 things that could go wrong. And then we write a contract clause to address every single one of them, no matter how remote the possibility might be. And, and then another lawyer gets a hold of that one and thinks of something else and adds more. And it goes on and on and on. It's rare that you find an agreement that's just broken down in the layman's terms and it's one page long. It's just rare that it ever happens. We dang lawyers get involved and screw everything up.
Well, unfortunately, there's some companies that start helping out. For example, in our space, the software, web development, application sort of space, there's a thing called privacy, right? And so when you have a website, you have to disclose if you're using cookies that might be from a third party. And
Right.
that sort of came about because of some privacy issues, but in my opinion, it got taken to a little bit to an extreme. So now every website has to have a banner that has say that you're using cookies.
Down at the bottom, yeah.
Down at the bottom, or yeah. And so for you to do it properly, and I'm not an attorney, I have to disclose that, but for you to do it properly, you actually have to disclose the cookies, what they're used for, and then you have to have an option that if they actually say no, you stop those cookies from rendering or doing their thing. It's not just a yes-no thing. You have to actually stop them from doing or capturing the data, because some of this data is captured upon page load. So if you have a Google Maps frame or whatever, things like that. So there's tools that allow you to do that automatically as a business owner. Like Termageddon is one of them. I've had them on the podcast. They sort of give you a form, very long form that you fill out and tell it what services you use, etc. And then it builds out those privacy policy, cookie policies, and all that good stuff, and the little banner, but a legit banner that actually turns off the services and things like that. But most people don't know that, and so it becomes
I didn't know that until just now.
Yeah, it becomes an issue because then people get sued because their website was capturing their information, and it's just lawyers that are just trying to get at a quick buck by saying, hey, you've in California, you have my information, blah, 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 and you're not doing it right. And so they get these lawsuits, and it's terrible. So companies like Termageddon and others are fortunately helping out, giving us consumers a way to, like we were saying, to make maybe it easier for us to follow whatever the rules or guidelines are, because it's hard enough for you who are in it to understand everything that's changing and evolving and new laws being added and things like that. And where does that leave the consumer, right?
Yeah, in a bad spot because the average consumer, myself included, I don't know what that stuff means. Uh, I think it's rare that you find anybody that does who doesn't work in that space already and have sort of an intimate knowledge of it. Um, but that's where lawyers come in handy sometimes. Obviously the system can be abused, but at the same time, it's private lawsuits that most often make the biggest difference in safety and privacy, and things like that, because there isn't, a government agency that's going to enforce that. There's, the police station down the street is not going to enforce, whatever regulation it is that keeps your information private. So, oftentimes it falls on the shoulders of the private legal system to do that.
What is it about the fees that got people? So I think it's swung right back and forth. So before you would see these billboards and they would be like 5 billion collect. Well, they would used to be lower, right? Before it'd be like
Right.
10 million, 20 million. Now like 1 billion. No, they grow, right? And you see these, and that was commonplace. But then it started saying paid to clients, right? Because people then started saying, oh, yeah, you're billing that, but how much is the person getting? They're getting 1% or what, right? So when we see that, we have those ideas. Of course, they're just assumptions that people make based on false or inaccurate data. So what should the consumer know about these types of things? Is it really a huge percentage for the law office, or is it more towards the client, or does it vary by who's doing it or by type?
That is a complex answer to that question. I mean, I think consumers need to be as sophisticated as they can be when it comes to hiring a lawyer, uh, and not necessarily just hire a lawyer based on some number that's slapped on a billboard, right? Because you do see that all the time, and you're right. And now the numbers, potentially in the billions, that someone's collected on behalf of their clients, or got a $1 billion verdict, and there's always a story behind those numbers. I think it's probably pretty rare that that number is an accurate representation of, what we think in our minds anyway when we see that. Um, so I guess I would encourage anybody who's going to talk to a lawyer, hire a lawyer, to look beyond the marketing message, look beyond that number and actually talk to a lawyer, find out what that person's like. And my number one piece of advice to people who are thinking about hiring a lawyer or working to find somebody is find someone you like and find someone you trust, because you're diving into something that is not going to be done in a week or a month or even several months. More likely than not, you're in for an adventure that's going to last a year, maybe 2 years, maybe a decade. And if you are walking down that road with someone you don't like or you don't trust, it's going to make that journey really, really hard. Um, so I always encourage folks to reach out, talk to more than one lawyer. Don't just see the number on the billboard, call it up, and then, sign an agreement. That's the easy way to do it. I get it. And I understand why people do it. It's one less thing to worry about. But that is also how folks end up in bed with somebody who doesn't necessarily want to represent their interests, who isn't a good fit, who doesn't know the kind of law that they need them to know. So I just tell everyone to take their time, talk to people, get to know them, and understand exactly what it is that you're looking at before you sign that agreement.
That's excellent advice. I don't think many people realize that when they're going into it. And you brought up a very good point, which is the expertise. They might be very good at a specific type of case, but maybe they're not good at all at the type of cases that you need.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, it's probably true for every industry, right? I mean, there's people who are specialists in one thing and not specialists, don't specialize in another. Um, but you have to be wary of that person who, will still take on that work, without being a specialist because they might see a paycheck sometime down the road. Um, so yeah, it's always important to ask about that particular case because a car accident is different than a medical malpractice case, is different than an aviation accident case. They're all different. And every lawyer's experience level and knowledge of those differences is different. And quite frankly, I mean, as a lawyer, not knowing exactly how a particular case is going to run is dangerous because I might not know, all the pitfalls along the way, the different, nuances of the law or the rules governing those cases, and that can be devastating for a case if I miss something along the way because I just didn't know.
And and again, yeah, you gave good advice there because it does apply to every industry. When you see someone just taking on the work,
Right.
even if they don't seem like an expert, you see the exact opposite. I think it's easier to see the exact opposite. When someone doesn't need the work, they will say no,
Hmm.
right? When they're at a spot, when they're so good that they know their stuff and they have enough work, like they don't need that specific one to eat, for example, they will say no because they know they might not do an excellent job on it. And so if you're on the other side of this and go with someone and they might just do it because they're just racking up billing for their firm, that could be
Yeah,
dangerous.
it's dangerous. Yeah, it's dangerous for the consumer. It's dangerous for the professional or providing that service. But I think you see it everywhere. I mean, it's just, it's the nature of our system.
Yeah. What is the how do I say this? There's this idea I think some people have of if I have a party at my house or there's someone doing work at the house. Like, how much should I be scared of something happening at that party for someone? And then does my home insurance take care of that? Do I need something else? If a worker comes in, should I let them in or not unless they have their own type of thing that they show to me in paper? Like, how does one, just as a regular person, deal with these things?
The absolute easiest way to deal with those kinds of things is to get insurance, whether that's homeowners insurance or renters insurance, something that's going to cover you in the event that, something bad happens and you're deemed to be at fault. Um, our system is based on reasonableness, and that's anytime you're talking about the civil legal system when it comes to doing what I do, it's all based on reasonableness. You know, is what Armando did reasonable under those circumstances? Was he reasonably careful under those circumstances? You know, and so if you're acting like a reasonable person, you're taking measures to be careful, odds are pretty good you're going to protect yourself. Um, it's when you're not being careful. It's when you're having a giant bonfire in the backyard with a bunch of drunken friends. Those kinds of situations could get you in trouble along the way. Um, but that's having insurance then helps you cover for that unreasonableness that you might engage in, along the way. The worker at your house is a different situation. I would encourage anytime you're going to hire somebody, an independent contractor to come work on your house, make sure that they've got their own insurance. Because if they don't, you could end up being on the hook for something that they do along the way. And that's another nichey piece of the law altogether, but it's something to be aware of for sure.
Because there's two sides of it, right? It's what they could do to your property that then you have to pay for if they don't have a way to cover it. But then it's the other side of if they get hurt doing
And
what they're doing wrong.
yeah, and that's the more dangerous side of it, right? If someone falls from a ladder, and suffers life-changing injuries, you don't want to be on the hook for that, simply because someone didn't have the right workers' comp insurance that they should have had. So it's always a good idea to ask and make sure that any independent contractor, like a roofer, a painter, anybody, is covered before they start working on your home.
Oh, that's good. That's good advice. What should people ask service providers for?
I just ask them, you got work comp insurance?
Work
I
comp
mean,
insurance.
that's the question you ask. And
Mhm.
if they've got it, they're covered, you're good to go. If they don't, you should probably find another contractor.
That's excellent advice. I I think we all just want to be protected from
Yeah,
all angles, right? Like from the homeowner, from the renter, from the business owner, actually, right? So
right.
what is the what should a business owner be thinking about when starting a business, or even if you've had a business for a long time?
Hmm.
There are people like you that go on these cases for people that might have had a problem, right? So how
Right.
does a business owner make sure they're following the rules or are protected so that if something happens to someone and they are at fault or could be at fault, that they're protected and don't go under because of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, again, buy insurance, and get a reasonable amount of insurance. Don't, just go purchase $25,000 policy because that's the smallest one you can find. Figure out, as a business owner, I mean, sort of look into the future and think, okay, if this goes wrong, what could possibly happen? What are the reason, realistically the outcomes of that? And buy enough insurance to cover that. And once you've got that, then in terms of the way you behave and act in the world, know the regulations, know the rules. Make checklists for yourself when you're doing things, the way doctors sometimes, surgeons sometimes do. You know, they write, this is the leg to cut, and things like that. And that's going to prevent mistakes. And, mistakes are the reasons people get hurt. And so if you know the regulations, you know the rules, you know how to create a checklist to make sure you're covering everything, those are the kinds of things any business owner, no matter what business they might be in, can protect themselves. And if that's all documented, that's good evidence of reasonableness along the way, and in the rare event that someone like that gets sued, they are going to have the documents to back up the reasons they did the things they did. And that's really what, and it's just a matter of, instead of thinking about how much money am I going to make on this, how small can I, make my costs and how big can I make my profits? Just think, how would you want your family treated? How do you want your neighbor treated? And treat your clients like that. And I think if more businesses, no matter what business they're in, thought like that, rather than solely thinking about the bottom line, you'd put people like me out of work. And I would happily go find something else to do if that were the case.
That's amazing advice, Sean. I think you're gonna give people quite a bit of peace of mind with what we've talked about today. There's the whole being prepared aspect of it, then the doing the checklist, for example, knowing the regulations, getting insurance, right? But most importantly, for situations like accidents, malpractice, and things like that, talking to multiple potential attorneys or firms and getting out there, preparing yourself as a consumer so that it's not just, yeah, I'm just going to go with the first one.
Right. It's
And
harder to do, but man, it's so helpful.
yeah, especially for the long run, like, because you said something very important, which is the case might take weeks, months, years, right? And first of all, we don't expect that. But second of all, okay, now we know that being both with someone that you like and trust, but that is going to be there, right? Because if it's some like this just new outfit out there, I mean, obviously people have to start somewhere, but depending on the, I guess, severity of your case, you might want to consider, okay, so do I want someone more experienced? How will they be there by the time my
No doubt.
case
Yeah.
is the same thing happens with insurance, right? So I think I have a follow-up question here for that. The fee structure, right? So talking about the same thing, if I see, oh, maybe you're not going to bill me if you don't win, right? Or things like that. So how do I, as a consumer, then trust you enough to say, well, we're going to be in this together for a few months. How do I trust that you're actually going to be paying the right attention to it if maybe something bigger comes along and this is just like, small beans on the side, right?
Right. Well, and again, that comes down to finding the right person for the job. Here at our firm, we obsess over the customer experience. It's something that I think is important. I think it's the reason we're here, right? We're a service-based industry. And so part of that client experience that we create is making sure that we're in touch with our clients every single month. Making sure they understand what's going on with their case, even when there's nothing going on. And that will happen. There's going to be months that go by when there's nothing to report, but we report it anyway to let them know nothing is happening. And so I think for anybody to protect themselves against that, is to find out what that firm is all about, find out what that lawyer is all about in terms of that communication and keeping their case front of mind, because it happens. The billboard lawyers and tight TV lawyers and things like that. Some of those firms, will take on 1,000 clients. And when you've got that many clients, the time that you have to devote to any one case is limited. All right. There's only so much time in a day, in a week, in a year. And, it's important for clients to ask those kinds of questions. How many cases do you take on every year? How many cases do you have in-house right now? Are you going to have time to work on my case? Have those conversations. They're difficult questions to ask, especially if you're walking into a conversation and you're already intimidated. But they're so important to ask. They really are. And, if you've got a lawyer that's on the other end of the line who's not willing to answer those questions, that is not a lawyer who's worth hiring.
Wow, that's excellent. And also keep in mind for the listeners, if you see the person on the billboard, you're very likely not going to get the person on the billboard actually doing the work. Is that
Good.
right?
There's a good solid chance of that. Yeah. Odds are good that is not going to be the case, right? You're going to get another lawyer at the firm who's going to work on that case, and you're never going to talk to that guy on the billboard.
And so I think, for example, when I was looking through your website and things like that, I see you have a video that pops up and
Yeah.
of you, and it's very personalized. I saw what you're saying now. I see you walk the talk, right? It's good. It's good. Nowadays, we're in this big wave of content, right? It's a content era where people have to show. It's not only the billboard now or the advertisement to show people what you're actually doing, what you're all about, and all the personal side of it. And I think that's something that many businesses lack in general, but that it's coming along and people are starting to get the hang of it. So I'm glad you are doing in your firm these things, because at the end of the day, whether people hire you or not, you're doing a service to the community just by sharing that information that you're sharing.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope you're right about that. And that stuff takes a long time. I mean, that's the reason why I think a lot of law firms, probably a lot of businesses don't do it, because it takes time and it takes effort. It's not something that I'm going to see a return on tomorrow or maybe even next year or maybe even the next decade. It's long term. And like I said, if people become educated and businesses and corporations and insurance companies start doing what they should do rather than what the bottom line demands they do, they're going to put me out of business. And like I said, I will happily go find something else to do, because that will mean we're living in a much safer place.
That's amazing, Sean. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It has
Thanks
been
for
a
having me.
pleasure. And where can people find you and your company so that in case somebody needs some of your work, they can get to?
Easiest way to find us is through our website, protectingthewest.com. Uh, that's what we do. It's sort of our mantra and what we live by here. So that's the easiest way to find us. And, whether it's a question about something we can handle or take on or not, we're always happy to take the time to answer questions and help people out. And, my mantra is we make sure everybody who calls in or walks in leaves in a better position than they were before they made that call or before they walked into the office. So that's something we always strive to do.
That's amazing. I'll put that in the show notes so people can find you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.